Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are getting pumped up for the weekend. It's a long weekend up here in Canada. July 1st, of course, is Canada Day, so I finally have a video where maybe I can sport my Jays gear and get super excited about that. But we're going to jump in here and go over all 30 teams. I'm just going to name who I think at the midpoint season right now, who I would consider the MVP of that team. Couple of teams I kind of talk about two players because maybe it's kind of close per se, but overall we're going to go first through 30. It's going to be based on alphabetical order, so you know how that goes. Before I jump in, guys, if you are new to the channel, subscribe because you guys only do it when I ask. So this is me asking. We do a power ranking every Sunday, and that's probably the most popular video on the channel, but we do fun videos like this one throughout the season, like predictions and kind of other rankings, and that seems to be my bread and butter on this channel. So if you're new, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, guys, let's jump into it. So at number one here, we do have the Arizona Diamondbacks, and for my MVP of the Diamondbacks so far, I do have Ketel Marte. I don't think there is too much debate on this team. Pitching-wise, coming into the season, we thought that was probably going to be the strength of this team. So no one else really standing out on the bats. Ketel is leading the team in hits, home runs, on-base percentage, and he is 7th in wins over replacement across the entire MLB. So I don't think there's too much of a debate on this one. Ketel Marte is your Arizona Diamondbacks MVP. So we move on. Atlanta Braves. This one's a little interesting. It's been a big, interesting season for the Braves. They've been up and down for the majority of the season, but I'm actually going with a pitcher on this one, and that pitcher is Chris Sale. He has a sub-3 ERA, which I think coming into this season, it was a comeback season for Chris Sale, and for that to be the case, 10 wins as well for him so far this season. The rotation has lost a couple of key members to keep this team afloat, and to be able to have Chris Sale be that staple so far, I think is a big part of why Atlanta has at least managed to stay on top of where they are at. We do have to give a little bit of a shout out to Ozuna. He's had quite an amazing season so far as well. So number 3, going on to the Bs, we do have the Baltimore Orioles, and honestly, you can't really argue with who's going to be the MVP of the Baltimore Orioles right now. They have a lineup that is full of talent, a lot of guys that are young, up and coming, etc., but the league leading in WAR, Gunnar Henderson, is going to be the guy I'm naming. He's leading the league. There was a stat that came out today that he is even on pace to be higher than Barry Bonds when it comes to this point in the season in terms of WAR, back when Barry Bonds was in his absolute heyday. He's been a big part of this Orioles lineup, and I think he has 25 home runs. I hadn't written it down, but there you have it. Gunnar Henderson. I don't think there's too much of debate. If you did watch my all-star picking video where I leaned shortstop to be Bobby Witt Jr., my bad. I think I was a little bit off on that one. If I could go back and change my vote, I probably would. Next up, we got the Boston Red Sox. This one was a little tough in my books. There's two guys that are really slashing it. Ended up leaning towards somewhat of the guy that is, per se, the team captain. Been there for a long time, expected to be there for a long time. So Rafael Devers is my MVP so far in the first half of the season. He has played and missed more games than Duran. So Duran is my other one, Jarren Duran, and he's been a big part of why Boston has been so successful. But when you have to pick straws, maybe Duran's at the top for most people, some other people, but I'm going with Rafael Devers. Got to give a shout out as well on the pitching side. Hoek having a great season for the Red Sox. Next up, this one was a little tough. I was looking at the offense side of things for the Cubs, and not a whole lot going for them. Shota Imanaga, off to an amazing start on this season. He is right now my MVP for the Cubs. If you kind of take out the 2 outings that he had where he pretty much got blown up, I do believe that he is kind of the elite side of the pitching thing. They do have as well Javier Assad, who's had a great season for them as well. And on top of that thing, the Cubs, not a lot of offensive juggernaut stuff going for them, so it was really hard to decide. No one really in their roster is really making a name for themselves when we're starting to look at wins over replacement. So MVP-wise, I had to go with Imanaga. But yeah, some of these are going to be a little bit tough. But number 6, even though they are the absolute worst team in the MLB, I thought it was fairly obvious who we're going to pick here with Garrett Crochet. He has running at a 12.4 Ks over 9, and that's just absolutely crazy. When you look at this team, 0 players are above 1 win over replacement on this team. 0. So that says a lot for a team that is in last place. They're basically putting out a replacement level team, especially when it comes to the bat. Of course, we know Luis Roberts missed a majority of the season so far, so that may be impacting it. Of course, Crochet is pretty much the only highlight so far for this White Sox team. Number 7, I don't think there's going to be too much debate who the MVP of the Cincinnati Reds is so far this season, and that's Elly De La Cruz. He's off to such an amazing start, and especially on running the bases. He's up to 38 stolen bases so far this season, on pace, so I guess for about 80 potentially, which puts him right up there around the top. Other than that, he has 3.6 wins over replacement. He's played 81 games, so that's right there at the middle mark. What he's going to be able to do with not a whole lot around him, so he's not going to be able to rank up on the RBI side. He's not really known. He does hit the home run ball, but that's not the race he's making at this point. He's the guy that you can't really replace on the Cincinnati Reds team, and nor do I think you would want to. Number 8, the team that is absolutely crushing it, and this one, to me, wasn't too much of a debate. A lot of people are probably going to say Jose Ramirez, captain of this team, essentially been on this team for so long. But I am going with the MVP so far this season is Steven Kwan. The guy has been absolutely hitting the baseball. He's only got 7 home runs on the season so far, and his OPS is already around 1,000. He was above 1,000, but it has dipped a little bit below that. He's been a staple at the top of this lineup, a big part of what the offense has been about with this Guardians team. If you really look at this Guardians team, a lot of names coming out of nowhere, like Fry as well, that are just making headway. His team is young. It's been exciting to watch his team climb the power rankings board, and they are at a career high right now. And just a little preview, if you do watch, they are fighting for that number 1 spot this week. We'll see if they can dethrone last week's number 1. This one was really hard to do, and it's the Colorado Rockies. And I ended up going with Ryan McMahon. Not a whole lot on this team that really stands out. If you're comparing anyone on this team with other top players, they're probably one of the lowest ranked in terms of MVP-wise on the board. Ryan McMahon, he's been solid on this team. He's been on it now for a couple of years. He's leading the team in home runs and as well as some hits. So the other side of things, if you want to look at some pitchers, you got Cal Quantrill. Kind of gave a little bit of a look to him. Of course, being in Coors Field, it's really hard to have amazing numbers when it comes to home runs, but so I thought Cal Quantrill is having quite a good outing considering all of that. Next up, I do have the Detroit Tigers, and the Tigers have turned into this team that has like some top level guys that you could put in the MVP conversation, as well as the rest of the guys are not really good. For example, Riley Green is the only player on this team that basically has any positive WAR whatsoever. He's not my pick for the MVP of this team. So far this season, I do go with Tarek Skubal. He has been lights out, and he's a big part of this rotation. We also have Jack Flaherty, who has honorable mention in there. So this rotation has been a big part of what has been successful for Detroit. They've fallen off quite a bit since the beginning of the season, falling a few games below 500. And to me, that is because their bats are just super quiet. If it wasn't for Tarek Skubal and Jack Flaherty as well, it would be a disaster for Detroit, in my opinion. So Tarek, pretty much every 5 days, you got a pretty solid chance at a win going to the mound. That's going to be huge. Number 11. Coming into this season, I don't think I would have ever put this guy in this board, but Kyle Tucker. He missed about 20 games, and he's still leading his team in home runs, which is absolutely crazy to me. And he has almost double, does that say WAR? I think he has almost double the second place WAR on his team, which absolutely crazy. He's had a pretty rough season as a team. This team's starting to come around. I do believe he is a big part of that. Not to go too much into it, but Yordan Alvarez not having the greatest season so far. Altuve is the one guy that I would consider as well being in this conversation. The pitching side of things, Blanco, believe it or not, is the top guy on the pitching side. And coming into the season, if you said Blanco was leading the rotation, you'd be scared for an Astros fan. So at least this offense has been somewhat productive, especially Kyle Tucker. Next up, we already kind of briefly touched on it when we talked about the Orioles. Bobby Witt Jr., without a question to me, is the best player on this team. 20 stolen bases, batting 300, 900 OPS. He's an all-around five-tool player. You don't see players like Bobby on teams all the time. And Kansas City, after watching them play the 6 games earlier against Toronto, you just know Bobby is going to deliver the clutch hit. He's getting it done. So a big shout out to him. He's the MVP of Kansas right now. Number 13, I had the LA Angels. And when I was kind of getting ready for this one, this guy caught me by surprise, and he stood out amongst the rest of his team. Of course, there's not a lot of bats really standing out. They got the young guys like Neto. He's having a pretty decent season. You have other guys like Kevin Pillar coming in there. But Tyler Anderson, looking at his number, he has a 2.63 ERA. He is 7-7, but on a team like the Angels, having a 500 win record, gotta give a little bit of props where props is due. Tyler Anderson is having that great season, and he's helping this Angels team pick up some W's along the way. So I wanted to give him the MVP at the midpoint for the LA Angels. Next up, we have the LA Dodgers, a team that is just absolutely stacked. Mookie Betts, of course, probably would have been my number one pick for this position had he not go down with that injury, and had he not have to be competing with Shohei Ohtani himself. So I am giving those honors to Shohei. He is one of the best guys across the entire MLB right now. Over 1,000 OPS, leading his team in average, hits, home runs, and RBIs, all of the offensive categories. Of course, we don't see him this season being able to pitch, but next year he's going to be pitching as well. Going to be absolutely crazy. He's always in the conversation for being MVP of the entire league. The fact that he's up for debate on his own team just goes to show how good this Dodgers team even is. Number 15, we got the Miami Marlins, and this one was probably the hardest one to pick. And I leaned one guy specifically because I remember 2 moments this season so far where he had somewhat of a highlight. Otherwise, this team really doesn't have anyone outstanding, demonstrates that they deserve an MVP level. But just because I had to give everyone on this team, I am giving it to Jazz Chisholm Jr. And those 2 moments that stand out to me were 2 grand slams. He hit them early in the season, so that does help them there. Otherwise, there's not much to talk. Miami has most of these guys, their WAR is 1 or sub 1. I think Chaz was around 1.2, if I remember, somewhere like that, but there was not a lot for Miami to be excited about. Number 16, this one was a fun one to look up. I was kind of torn. We got Bryce Terang. He was an honorable mention, of course, leading the team in a lot of different categories. A young guy, of course. But for me, this one went to Williams Contreras. Being in the backstop, he's leading his team in certain offensive categories, as well as this team has had some pitchers who are having pretty great seasons. So you got to give a lot of credit to a catcher. I think this is the first catcher and possibly the only one on this list. His brother might have been on the list had that injury not happened, but he has been a big staple of what has caused this Milwaukee Brewers team, in my opinion, to be successful on both sides of the baseball. So that is why I'm giving it to him. Next up, number 17. This one was super tough, and I had to give it to Carlos Correa. He's had somewhat of a bounce-back season, and when it comes to power, hasn't been anything crazy. I think he's sitting around 8 home runs or something like that. And honestly, if we look at just individual stats, you might start to link that Royce Lewis, had he not missed 3/4 of the season so far, he's on pace to be dominating his team in offensive categories. I expect him to probably be the MVP of his team by the end of the season. But right now, I do think Carlos Correa, a veteran player on a team that has had its ups and downs, very streaky team, and I think someone like him has probably been a big staple in what has kept them afloat so far this season. On the pitching side of things, not a lot going for them. Bailey Ober, I think, was their top pitcher, and I don't think he really brought anything to the table that would make me consider him the MVP. Next up, the New York Mets, and to me, there's one person alone. It's Francisco Lindor, and it feels crazy kind of saying that because he's been so atrocious for the number of seasons. Having a pretty good season this year. If you just look at his baseline stats, it's like nothing to be super crazy about. For me, he's the team captain of this team. This Mets team was bottom row of the power rankings and was struggling to get going. And then he held this team players only meeting. He was allegedly the player behind it. And since that moment, the Mets have been one of the hottest, if not the hottest teams in the MLB. So at this point, I'm giving it to Francisco Lindor. Even if that's not true, I think he is. Number 19. Yankees. You could maybe say that there's a debate on who it is, but I don't think there is. Aaron Judge, by far, is leading this team in home runs, leading the league in home runs. He's 30 home runs. He's batting 300. He has 71 RBIs. Just absolutely demolishing on a team that's in the tops of the American League. Juan Soto, of course, always going to be on his heels, but right now, you got Aaron Judge at the top, just absolutely crushing it. He's technically on pace to beat his home run record. Absolutely crazy to talk about. Number 20. This was one of the hardest ones. Mason Miller, of course, is a relief pitcher, probably the most recognized name on this team, probably the player having the best season on this team. But I didn't go with any relief pitchers because at the end of the day, in my opinion, relief pitchers, they're not the most valuable player on any team. I don't care if you're the closer getting it done. Your team has to get you there. You might be solid, best closer, but I don't think a relief pitcher can be the most valuable player on the team. Otherwise, you're not really going to be a relief pitcher. That's just my opinion. So, otherwise, I went with Brent Rooker on this team. He's leading his team in a bunch of the stats. He seems to be somewhat of the most solid guys on this team. But again, it's the A's, not a whole lot standing out, so I'm not going to go too much farther. Number 21, we got a team full of dominant players. But I had to go with the most dominant man himself. Bryce Harper is leading this team in a lot of the offensive categories. Batting over 300, he's just been crushing the baseball. On the other side of things, this Phillies rotation, you got Nola, you got Wheeler, and even on top of that, you have Ranger Suarez, who has just been absolutely crushing at 10-2 with a basically 2 ERA. So the thing that stopped me from leaning towards a pitcher in this one, because all around the pitchers are pretty solid. You lose one of them, maybe you don't get hurt as much. In my opinion, of all the players on this Phillies team, the one you don't want to lose the absolute most, maybe I'm wrong, Phillies fans let me know, is Bryce Harper. Number 22. This one was fun. I think arguably you could go with Paul Skeens. This guy has been absolutely electric since coming up. I think he's 4-0 in his 8 starts, maybe 6 starts. Basically around a 2 ERA on the season. And by far the best pitcher the Pirates have. But when we start to take a further look at it, Brian Reynolds is my MVP for this Pittsburgh Pirates. And a lot of that is he's the only guy on this offense that is doing anything. Everyone else, the wins over replacement is basically 0. He's not too much further ahead, but he's leading this team in almost every offensive category. So you can't really argue with that. But Paul Skeens, without Paul Skeens, the pitching's somewhat decent. Of course, Paul Skeens is that ace. Without Brian Reynolds, there is absolutely no offense on this Pirates team, and that's why I went with them. Next up, we have the San Diego Padres. Erickson Profar was the guy I ended up going with, and he has just been having one of those seasons that maybe he's been capable of for a long time, batting over 300, OP on-base percentage over 400. He's been pretty much the only guy that's been consistent on this team throughout the entire season. Pitching-wise, on that side, Dylan Cease maybe leading it, but he did not have any numbers that would you even put him in top 15 pitching categories, let alone MVP on his team. But the one thing I think is pretty interesting is that he's got about a 480 slug percentage. Like, he's not hitting the ball with massive power that you would see from other guys on this list. But the consistency and being a big part of this team's offense has been what basically has led San Diego to be where they are. Next up, the San Diego Giants, and I was astounded to find out because like when I was making this list, WAR was a big part of what I was looking at to least narrow down my picks. And to see Matt Chapman as the number 1 WAR guy on this Giants team, he's like one of the few guys on this team that has played most of the games of the season. I was shocked to see the Giants roster switching as much as it did and as many guys not filling out a full season. So maybe I haven't been closely paying enough attention to these Giants, but I had to go with Logan Webb as the MVP of this team. He has been a staple of this rotation now for a number of years. He's been continuously being consistent this season, and that's when you have a rotation that doesn't have a lot of guys standing out or guys that have underperforming seasons like some of these guys on the Giants, to have that solid guy like Logan Webb on a team's offense that is as bad as the Giants, you got to give it to him. Feels a lot like Doc Holliday when he was on that atrocious Blue Jays team. Maybe not as good as Doc Holliday, but yeah. Number 25, I do have the Seattle Mariners, and this one was fun. I was shocked to say this, but there's like 4 pitchers on this team that you really consider as possible MVPs. I don't really want to go to the bats in Seattle because that is not any reason whatsoever why this team is where they are. Cal Raleigh is the best batter on this team, the catcher, and he's only like a 2 WAR whatsoever. But then when we start looking at their rotation, you got Castillo, who's got over 100 Ks, and then we got my MVP pick, who is Logan Gilbert. Absolutely having an amazing season. He has a sub-1 whip, and he has pitched he has pitched the most innings per game of anyone across the MLB right now. He's currently 4 innings pitched behind 2 guys in the overall innings pitched, but he has 1 less game than those guys. So eating up a ton of innings. He's played 16 games. He has 13 quality starts, and he stands out in a team that's full of a rotation of solid pitchers. He's standing out, and he's definitely, in my opinion, the MVP because he's the captain of the pitchers at this point. Next up, number 26. This one was a little tough. They have so many guys in here. Brandon Donovan was the batter that I end up going with on this one in terms of MVP style. It's almost like a showing of like, this is a new Cardinals team. We've seen them struggle right out of the gate. Goldschmidt and Arenado both basically around 0 WAR right now on the season. If I wanted to give a shout out to a pitcher, it's Sonny Gray. He's coming back after dealing with that hamstring injury at the beginning of the season. He's pitching pretty electric for this team, and he's probably would be my second vote. And like I already talked about earlier, if Contreras didn't break his arm, I think he was a big factor of what could have been the MVP of this team. But right now it's Brandon Donovan. Don't know a lot, but he's pretty much, in my opinion, the face of possibly this new young generation. We also had I had Mason Wynn as well as possible consideration in the shortstop position. For some reason, I don't know if it's just because shortstops have such a wide variety of who's good, who's not, but it seemed like shortstops were a lot easier to get higher WAR than some other people. So I did end up going with Donovan on that one for MVP. Number 27, a Tampa Bay team. It's always been known as no real standouts. We did have Wander Franco a couple of years ago, right? He was the guy that was making a splash for this Tampa Bay team, but no one really stands out like crazy for this. I ended up going with Isaac Paredes. He only has 12 home runs, 41 RBIs, but he's still leading the team in those categories. We have other players on this team that are really struggling. Other than him, Diaz maybe having an okay season on the rotation side of things. No one really standing out. So Tampa Bay kind of staying as they normally are, status quo. But Isaac Paredes had to give it to someone, and I'm giving it to you. Next up, I do have the Texas Rangers. I was debating on this one for a long time between 2 guys. I ended up going with Corey Seager as the MVP so far this season. Arguably, I think it's pretty even that you could possibly go with Marcus Semien. These 2 guys have managed to continue to be the staple in this lineup through the struggles. And Semien, Seager not having amazing seasons. I think Semien's batting around 250, Seager slightly more. Seager missed about 10 games or so at one point, and he has a little bit higher offensive numbers, so that's kind of what I went with. When it got really close, I did sometimes start to look at their wins over replacement on the defensive level, but both those guys are above 0, above 1, I think, as well. So not too much interchangeable, but I think Seager is a little bit more of that MVP kind of guy for this Texas Rangers. Next up, I don't think there's a debate on this team whatsoever. It's Vladdy Guerrero Jr. He's like the only guy that's batting anywhere near 300. He's still leading the team in every offensive category that seems to be, except stolen bases, but we know he's not going to lead that. But Vladdy, he's started off super slow, and we've seen him come on over this past month, probably top of the MLB in a lot of numbers, and it's brought his averages, slugging, OPS, all that fun stuff way up. And so the offense of the Jays kind of goes with it. I want to give a nice shout out to Kiner Falefa. He's had a great season, and he was actually leading the Blue Jays in WAR. Last but not least, we do have the Washington Nationals, and I went with C.J. Abrams in this position. This young cat has been absolutely crushing it since he started playing for this team. Not a whole lot going for this team otherwise. He's leading in a lot of the categories. Don't watch a lot of him, so I can't really speak much. This is probably one of the teams I watched the least of on the board, but I think when I was looking at the numbers, just read articles, he always seems to be that guy stepping up. So I think he is the MVP of the team. And there you guys have it. Halfway through this season, every team has somewhat of an MVP going. Let me know what I might have forgotten, who I probably gave a big stud to. Left them off the list and I should have considered them. Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you for Power Rankings on Sunday.